Hi, have you ever considered laboratory sciences as an option, as a career? Do you know anybody who's a laboratory scientist? I am a laboratory scientist. I'm a medical doctor, went to medical school, but ended up as a laboratory scientist through specialty training in pathology. Do you know how many careers or how many career options there are in the lab? Today, we're going to be talking to a laboratory scientist. So, if you're interested in a career as a laboratory scientist, or even if you're just curious about it, stick around. Hi, welcome to Making Healthy Choices with Dr. L. If you're new here, I'm Dr. L. If you're a returning subscriber, welcome back. So today I bring you a video with a laboratory scientist, Katlego Kabotho, who is currently working or operating in Botswana. So Katlego, welcome, and thank you for agreeing to have a chat with me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on your platform and introducing me to your community. Like you said, my name is Katlego Kabotho. I am a medical laboratory scientist by profession, and I'm also an epidemiologist. So I did my undergrad in Namibia from 2009 to 2013 and graduated with a BSc in biomedical science. So that is the degree, the undergrad degree for biomedical science. And then from 2017 to 2019, I enrolled for an MSc program with Stellenbosch University, and the program was clinical epidemiology.
All right. So, why biomedical sciences? When you finished high school, did you know this is what you wanted to do? What made you gravitate towards biomedical sciences?
Okay, so there's this one cousin of mine. Growing up, him and I, were known as the family scientists, and we would always, picture ourselves in like lab coats and stuff like that. So we were always sciencey, right? But as kids, we never really figured out what really is the science thing. But you always picture someone in a white lab coat, either as a doctor or someone working in the lab, could be a food lab or whatever. So that's what we were sort of into. And then when I finished my Cambridge, or what we call Form 5 side, I applied to the University of Botswana. And, I think career guidance in Botswana is a bit lacking because we sort of stumble into things and you just are told, look for school and get a good job so that you're set for life, right? So I remember applying to the University of Botswana, and I applied to a BSc, and then I also applied to Department of is it engineering? FET, what they call. I don't know
Faculty
what
of
it's.
Engineering and Technology, I
Yes,
think.
yes. I applied for geomatics, the bachelor's of geomatics. They responded first for the BSc guys. So I was like, oh my God, I had this thing like, oh, I can't be outdoors, wearing a hat and picking rocks. That was my juvenile understanding of what, geomatics was. And I remember in the same time, we used to have, I don't know if they still do it now, where the Ministry of Education would bring in different institutions from SADC for us to be exposed to universities in the region. I remember going with my friends, and Namibia's University of Science and Tech was there, and they had this biomedical sciences program. And I went to their stall and I was like, oh, let me apply, right, with the other schools. And I applied, I had my transcripts there, and they gave me an immediate response. And it was like a acceptance letter. Because I was still hopeful with the whole BSc thing, I just chucked it in my bag and forgot about it. But when those guys were taking a bit of time to respond, I actually told my mom, I once applied for this school, and then my mom just encouraged me to, maybe pursue it and all of that. So that's when I started doing research. And it's so funny how it then, in retrospect, aligned with, me thinking of myself in a white lab coat and all of that. So when the Fed guys responded, I turned down the admission, and then the BSc guys responded. And I was like, honey, I'm going to Namibia. Bye. Because now I'm getting excited about the prospects of studying in a different country. And I had already gotten an acceptance from the Ministry of Education to pursue the biomedical science degree. So I was excited about that. I was like, oh, let me leave the bots, guys, bots. Yeah. So that's how it all started. And this was 2009. That's when I started my first year. It was a 4-year program with practicals in the last year. And we were also told when we got to school for the very first time in our first year that the top 4 students cumulatively for the 4 years were going to be chosen, and then they're going to go for a trip in Cape Town to a sister university to see how they do things, because it was a fairly new program as well with the second cohort. So we knew that, but over the years, we sort of just forgot about that. And I remember in my 4th year, when that was announced, I was part of the top 4 achievers. I was like, oh. So yeah, my colleagues and I at the time then went to Cape Town, and it was an all expense paid trip. It was nice. So yeah, that's how it all came about. I did my practicals in Namibia and Namibia's Institute of Pathology, but I also did some of my practicals in Marina. That's how I got exposed to some of the BW systems and the people there. And then I graduated 2013.
Wow. What a fascinating story. It's interesting how you stumbled into it. It was not what you were looking for, but things worked out that you ended up going to Namibia and becoming a biomedical scientist. When you started, is it what you thought it would be? And when you got out of the program, when you graduated, what did you work as and what did you do?
Okay, so like you said, it was kind of a stumble upon the whole thing process. And then when we started our first year, I've always been inclined to the sciences. Even at school, I did pure sciences. So chemistry and biology were really my fate. So I knew that that was a thing that I wanted to pursue. However, not in the manner that it all happened. So in our first year, when we got exposed to the whole program and curriculum, I was like, oh, well, but I was too deep into it. I couldn't turn back, even though some of my colleagues, just after they finished the 4-year program, they went and studied medicine, and now they're doctors and they have this degree. But I grew to love it. I knew that I was a science girl, and I'm not someone who's very grossed out by a lot of things. Mm. So in the lab, we work with so many different specimens, from blood to any and everything that, someone can think of that comes from the human body. So I'm not grossed out by things like that. So I really grew to like the discipline. And because I'm sort of, even though now I've outgrown that, but I was always like a behind the scenes kind of girl. So I liked being in the lab, and because no one sees you when you're in the lab, because the patients face the doctors and the nurses. Those are the frontline guys. So us in the background, sometimes we see patients, but we just see a test tube, and that's how we relate to it. But I really grew to like the discipline because I got to understand how the body works and the pivotal role that the lab plays in diagnoses and just overall patient care. So I am absolutely proud. I really like it now. And people are also, I think after COVID, people are seeing the importance of the lab, because like I'm saying, patients face doctors and nurses, those people who are out there, and they're not really, some of them are not really informed about the lab, right? Because the doctor would say, no, I'll take bloods and then I'll give you results. So there's a bit of a disconnect in terms of roles, because like I said, we're in the background, we're like the movie directors, and the doctors and the nurses are the movie stars. So now people get to understand that, okay, this is what the lab does, especially after COVID. I have to go to the lab. There's PCR, there's all these fancy things now that are coming out, and the lab is the one that does that. I'm proud to be a lab scientist.
I'm proud of you because from
Thank
one lab
you.
scientist to another, very proud of you. Anyway, so when you graduated with your biomedical science degree, what did you work as? Where did you work? And what did you do?
I immediately came home because I was given a grant by the Ministry of Education. So it was like, you have to come home and work for that money, honey. So I immediately came home and I was looking for jobs everywhere in all the private laboratories. I was just knocking on doors everywhere. And of course, I applied to the Ministry of Health clinical services. So it took a while for me to be placed in the Ministry of Health. So in the interim, I worked as a medical laboratory scientist for one of the biggest private labs in the country, Diagnofirm. So I worked there for a whole year. And then that's when I got my placement in the public sector, after which I was attached to Scottish Livingston Hospital Lab, which is one of the biggest district laboratories in the country.
What did you earn when you first started working as a laboratory scientist, when you first graduated from undergrad?
I think my first paycheck fresh out of varsity was about 7,500 pula per month. But that was in private, right? And then I joined the government, and they have like allowances, scarce skill allowance, and my salary like more than doubles. Right? I think I got like 20K per month. And I'm just like, oh my God. For me, that was a lot of money.
Wow.
Yeah. Almost.
That's amazing. That's impressive. That's really impressive.
So I worked for about 7 years as a medical laboratory scientist. Obviously, with those 5 years at Scottish, we went from junior to, middle management and then management through the bands in the government. But mostly from a responsibility perspective, we graduated in that manner. So during those 5 years, that's when I started with my MSc. And then after that, I went in and joined corporate. And that is what paved the way to Maranyane and where I am now.
You said you joined corporate first.
Yeah.
So that corporate job, what did it look like? What did you do? And then what led you to starting Maranyane Laboratory?
Okay, this is a story that really lights me up because I think everything that has happened has led to this moment now, right? I'd always told myself that I can't be a medical laboratory scientist forever, even though I am, but I always had a target as to getting to bump up or level up. And that's why I then did my MSc. Then an opportunity came from this company that I joined called Mediland Healthcare Distributors. They wanted a marketing manager for the biomedical department. So it's a medical distributorship. So they have pharmaceuticals division and then biomed, surgical, and then health and beauty. So they wanted a sales and marketing manager for the diagnostic department where, the person would sell medical equipment and reagents and consumables, everything lab basically. So they wanted someone who could speak to the equipment that we use, who could speak the language, who could talk to the audience in that manner. So I interviewed and I got the job. So in December 2019, I hung my lab coat and I was like, thank you so much, PW government, for giving me 5 full years experience, technical, managerial. I was very appreciative, and then I joined the corporate world. I remember the very first time in a meeting, I was with my colleagues, my bosses, and these people were talking amounts, and I was shook because I'm coming from the lab. I'm purely technical, and these people are talking all these amounts, and because now I'm in the corporate world, they're talking money, right? I was just like, oh my gosh, so these figures really exist. I was a bit naive. And then 3 years later, just before I resigned, I was the one who was throwing out, figures like that. So the environment really shaped me as an entrepreneur because I supplied all of the medical laboratories, meaning through the company, with equipment. First of all, the equipment that we use in the lab, reagents, just maybe to bring people on board, the stuff that we use in the instruments to give people the results of the tests and consumables and such. So I went around a lot. And then there was this one time I was in Jwaneng, and then I realized, okay, so in Jwaneng, there's only one private medical lab, but it's not like privately owned. It's the Botswana Hospital. And then we've got the public institutions. There's a public lab here. So there was a gap in that the doctors here would send samples to gaps, right, to laboratories in Gaborone. So I saw that as an opportunity, and I was like, okay, I could come in and fill this gap, because you find that the catchment areas or the areas around Jwaneng or the communities around Jwaneng get medical attention in Jwaneng because it's like, the hub. So someone would drive as far as, Oma, maybe it's 80 kilometers, or Kakia, which is a bit of a distance to come for medical attention. And then because if they're a private client, they'd have to come back maybe a couple of days later for their results, for a review. So I saw that as an opportunity. I was like, okay, if I come in here and I can give these people their results within an hour or two, or within the same day, they would then go back to the doctor or to the pharmacist, and then they would complete whatever it is that they would have needed for that visit, and then they would go back home. They wouldn't have to come back. And this was also during the height of COVID, when we had travel restrictions, and just economically it doesn't work for other people, because you have to fuel your car, or you have to use money for transport. So in different areas, it becomes a benefit to the people, because after all, we're doing this for the people, right? So I saw that as an opportunity. And I remember in 2020, I registered this company with SIPA, Maranyane Medical Lab, on the 14th of October 2020.
You actually registered the company during the height of COVID?
Yeah.
Look at you, girl.
I was just like opportunity, and I went for it. And then 2021 was basically the planning phase for the lab. And then 2022 now was more of the implementation phase. In December 2022, we got our license. And then I was like, oh, so now I have to have that conversation with my boss. At this point, I was reporting directly to the CEO, because I was part of the exco of Mediland. So I had to have that conversation with him. He was happy for me, and he was like, go for it, Kat. I see your vision. You're the only one who can execute it in the way that you want it executed.